Hello, and thank you for joining the Fiatech Tuesday Tech Webinar. This webinar is called Capital Projects Management, the New Realities. And we have with us Sean Regan and Matt Milinusic, who will be presenting our presentation. Sean, take it away.
Well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you're at. That's the nice thing about webinars. As described, what we're going to do is try to give you a nice introduction based on the realities of what we have seen in the application in capital project management. The agenda is pretty straightforward. After the welcoming, I'm going to talk to you about some of the challenges and try to interact with you where we can to, see the commonalities that many of us in the industry have seen. From those, we'll talk about some of the items that we've identified and many of us talk about as new realities. You'll hear it at the Fiatech conference in a few weeks. You'll hear it at the AACE annual meeting. PMI and CPM are going to bring it up over the next few months, and the Guild talks about it all the time. And what we're going to do is just give some ideas that what we've working with numerous people through the associations have seen as some recommendations and methodologies to go forward. And we'll try to follow that up with a question and answer session. Just a brief introduction, the leadership of OnTrack. Matt Milinusic is the CEO of the company. Ryan Martinez is the Vice President of Support. They both primarily reside in Canada. Sorry, I'm speed checking. And I'm basically calling you from Prague, Czech Republic. I'm the president of the international operations for OnTrack, but I'm also the director of Region 9 for AACE, as well as been a member of them for 21 years. The OnTrack team basically has, on average, as you can see, most of us have 20 to 30 years of experience. Most of us have been in execution of projects. That's the fundamental difference, is that we're just not software people. We're just not people speaking from a home office, but we are talking to you and trying to present what we've seen in regards to execution. In a general perspective, I have managed or controlled about $40 billion of work across multiple business lines and spent the bulk of the past 19 years working international projects, every continent but Australia. We have worked with numerous companies, both as a software company, as a project management. This gives you an idea, and what the critical part is that most of these companies, as you can see, all have one thing in common. They're all embracers of project management, project control systems and theories in which the applications and processes and procedures are critical, and they all use various varieties of software. One of the things we're going to stress is the fact that there's a perpetual over-reliance on software. Hopefully a few of you are shaking your head up and down and nodding up and down about the fact that how many times your company, somebody in corporate or IT makes a decision to purchase a software for a few $1 million, but nobody has the backbone or the experience to implement this. So we have plenty of time to waste that upfront money because we got the slickest software, but we don't have the ability to analyze. And we become perpetually involved in what I call redundant data entry. So we like this little cartoon because it's basic and simple, and how many times have we seen it? Everybody's pointing at each other, total lack of controls, and the biggest point is everybody's trying to identify who's the biggest risk. Is the risk the client, the shareholder, the government? There's multiple risks involved, and all these risks will have an impact on your time, cost, and schedule. One of the key things I've tried to focus on the past few years, and it seems to be a market trend, is that capital PMOs, project management offices, are gaining more and more control. In this age, I started with Bechtel 30 years ago. My uncle worked for Bechtel for 38 years. My grandfather worked with them. And what we saw was an involvement, is that where people used to have massive complex organizations, the clients similarly had that organization. So in some ways you'd have a redundancy. But what we've seen over the past few years in an effort to save money, what's the first three things that gets cut? We cut project controls, we cut training, and we cut the staff to the experience. There is a great void that we tend to see when we have discussions at these conferences, and generally we like to sit around after the conference and have a nice drink and discuss all the little problems. But one of the most common problems that we always hear about is the fact that there is a void. There is a young market, and there's a bunch of us old graybeards of 30 years, but there's a lack of people between 5 and 15 years. And that causes a severe complexity in the organization because you have a lack of that people who can validate data or do analysis. One of the most interesting things, and some think it's a good and some think it's a bad, is with organizations such as PMI and their certifications or like that, or the old Primavera training programs, people get a certificate, go sell themselves for a job, but they lack that experience in which to complete a project. And generally, I spent the last few years, I was with Jacobs and a couple other companies being the fireman. And what that meant is I was perpetually going on projects that were in contractual jeopardy. And time again, we found that we had processes and procedures, but nobody had ever taken time to educate the people on the procedures. Similarly, when I was doing college recruiting for a couple companies, every graduate of a CM or engineering school wants to be a project manager in 5 years running complex projects. So you can see we sort of created a false generation now type perspective. Everybody wants to be, have everything right in front. They want to jump up the ladder. A couple of the things that I also noticed on the PMOs, and hopefully some of you have recognized, we're in an age when I was working with the universities and talking about their programs. 20 years ago, many companies would share projects and they would hire interns. Now, interns are few and far between, and companies do not share that data with the universities or stuff anymore. And similarly, an interesting perspective we see with ACCE, the American Conference of Construction Educators, is we see an issue that states and the universities are getting involved into the programs, and they're cutting critical courses such as planning, scheduling, and estimating, and increasing general information skills. And that tends to cause an issue is that we're getting people who are getting less experience and less ability and less training. So what does that result? It basically impacts the complexity. The PMO presents the highest visible part of the organization. Many of the companies I work with right now, for them, in regards to cutting their capital budgets so they don't have permanent staff, they hire companies, the Bechtel, Floors and Parsons and AMEC, Foster Wheelers. They basically run the PMO for the Shells and Chevrons and BPs. And what they do is they basically are brought in for a distinct project to manage that. And they are in turn managing usually one of their fellow EPC competitors. And this basically is an objective of trying to bring visibility up to the highest levels. The other thing of what it does is a PMO requires a control framework that's very vigorous and straight. You need to have the ability to present to your stakeholders and shareholders information so that they can maintain and control. This then ties into basically our intricity of our logistics. We, in many cases now, have seen an evolvement of the world again. Planners sit on one floor, estimators are in the dark in a corner, and the cost people in some cases are nothing more than accountants, and there is a lack of cost forecasting and an accountability to accounting. And as such, what we would all see as a very complex process gets made very redundant and slow. The PMO is meant in a functional way to allow access to multiple organizations and shareholders and to bring subject matter experts. A good PMO doesn't bring in 25, 30, 40, 50 people. It brings in a good team depending on the size of the project, and the objective of that team should be to educate, teach, and try to help the existing company. So I like to refer to that as a transfer of technology. The model I tend to feel that's been successful, this is just personal experience, is the model where basically we came in 5, 6, 7 people, trained them, and after a few years we were gone. And people get worried about that because they, oh my God, there's a loss of cash flow. But what I've tended to see is when we've done that, companies come back to us because they know that the objective is to be, maximize the profit and schedule of the program. The other thing that the PMO really gets into is a magnitude of risk. Risk like EVM, cycles. Right now, a lot of people are focusing on estimating. A couple of years ago, it was earned value management. A couple of years before that, it was risk. And it's a cycle of training. The problem is very few organizations now look at that risk. You'll have companies, I run Crystal Ball or I ran Risk Analyzer or another software, print a report out and feel they've done their risk. And what we've tried to notice in both AACE, the Guild, and PMI is that risk is a complex structure that is based on analysis. But the most important part about risk isn't just printing a report and looking at the numbers. It's basically using that and applying it in decision making. It does no good to anybody to identify the risk if you can't make a decision and apply to that. So what are the challenges we tend to see? And I think it pretty much highlights, in a lot of programs we get a lack of alignment. People know, they speak, they understand the terminology, but they can't seem to get the three focuses of the pyramid or triangle in alignment. And as such, that also leads us to a lack of visibility. We see the top in front of us, but we don't see what's in the bottom. For an example, on one of the projects I came in, I rotated in from Italy, was in the home office, sat in the home office, was handed a project that had just got completed. Everybody was claiming victory, a year ahead of schedule, $10 million under budget. But nobody had done a closeout on it. So as such, like that iceberg, we're missing all that bottom stuff. And as the ship went by, it gutted us. Never did you see a project manager, a program manager, an estimator, and myself, the business manager, pleading to lose the project because nobody had done the final validation. And it turns out they were ahead of schedule and under budget because somebody had utilized the contingency in the direct work instead of at the end. So they were perpetually looking like they were doing good when they were utilizing their contingency for hurricanes and storms. So that lack of visibility, and because everybody likes to celebrate the party and nobody likes to look at the defeat, that creates a severe lack of visibility and a challenge for us in the PMO, PMC operations. So the realities of what we tend to see right now is we're seeing a shifting of priorities. These priorities can be everything from energy, oil and gas, power, and the priorities such as oil running at between $45 and $50 an hour right now, that has created a realliance and reassessment of people's priorities. Countries are having to realign their budgets and companies are having to realign their programs. Booked works are dropping for people. Similarly, what we see is because we have become a very international geopolitical economy, you see isolationism. And so with that, you see regulatory and environmental pressures start building up. And this is causing a perpetual program for us. Some of the projects I've had recently is basically the shifting work and work patterns. Due to the last couple crises, we're seeing a disadvantage in skilled workers. And because some countries, it's very easy to bring in third country nationals, but other countries it isn't. And as such, even when we get people into these countries, what we're seeing is just because the labor department of a country reports they're paying 16 to 20 euros or dollars an hour, the market trend to getting qualified people is 25 and 30. And that causes an issue for a lot of companies because they're saying, well, we built our estimate on A, but they didn't do the appropriate salary surveys or check the work patterns to see where the people are going and where they're working. Also, we're seeing the reality of the fact that it doesn't change. We don't all get to build nice projects in Hawaii. We're building projects in remote and complex, difficult locations. North Dakota, Middle East. These areas basically have a very difficult and workforce and work pattern to get in, and it's very complex and hard to work with them. It's one of the largest issues. I've seen literally funded proposals for $4.5 billion for a nuclear project, and they didn't take in consideration anything, and we keep trying to explain to them just on the salary rate alone, the housing, the mandatory laws of the European Union, That's going to cost them $2 billion. And the client doesn't want to hear it. Well, we can advise them, and if they choose not to hear it and execute with it, shame on them. But our objective is that we are supposed to present the facts and figures and basis so that project management can make a solid decision on the way and path forward going forward. One of the other issues that we tend to see a great amount is technology is moving crazy. There probably isn't a person sitting around their desk right now who isn't on a laptop, a vid phone, a tablet, probably has a smartphone sitting there. And what do we have is we have all that technology and people wanting to do it. Show me a 13-year-old, I got a couple kids, show me a 13-year-old who basically sits there and reads a book. What are they? They're on their smartphone. Our technology is moving faster than we are. And as such, there is what I mentioned before, an over-reliance in the technology. The technology is moving faster, but the problem is the people can't even catch up to the knowledge of what they're doing. So we tend to see with this advancement in technology, it looks great. You get to go to all these nice conferences and see all these nice tools, but we lack that transitional application by the people doing it. And then one of the last things, owners and shareholders tend to expect more of people when they're hiring them. Internally, because of the needs and the shift within the company, you tend to see that there's a little bit more leniency. But when I hire somebody on a contract, I'm definitely a little bit more strict. The attitude and mentality changes. And as such, it focuses us to make sure that we see our cost control and we see the efficiency and risks that are contained. One of the other big items that's coming up is that I work with a lot of international financial institutions. And what the IFIs are expecting out of us now is that basically they are tired of perpetual clients who have great ideas and money but can't sit there and manage to it. So what they're doing is they're enforcing an increased level of transparency. If I seek money from an international financial institution or I seek money from a government financial institution, I am required to be very transparent. And nowadays people are all over the place. It's not uncommon to be an international working in North America or vice versa. And as such, we have acts such as the Foreign Corrupts Policy and others that we have to adhere to. So even though our client may not require to, you are legally and ethically required to do that. And these realities tend to make things a little bit more complex. So what do we focus on the PMO? What we found is that there are 4 key pillars in the PMO that dictate excellence. The first is that what we look at is that people want to see cost reduction and risk containment. How do I reduce cost by applying a PMO? I hire a company at 7 or 8 people. They're on a contract. It's very straightforward. I can release them at any time during the contract. As such, my risk is contained and developed. When I have to run a full-size organization like that, I can be held into, I can't release people, I have layoffs, I have legal, and as such, that increases my risk. So the ability to shift our risk is what a PMO brings forward. The second issue is that within that, it allows you to establish a control framework and guidance in government. In that governance, if you work a U.S. government project or an Australian project or a British government project, you are seeing that earned value management is a mandatory requirement. So the College of Performance Management and AACE and PMI are working very, very hard right now. There is an ISO standard on EV that's being worked and developed. Now imagine the complexity, unlike running an ISO on project management, ISO 9001, which says that you have processes and procedures. It doesn't dictate the way you do it. Part of the issue that you run into with earned value management is that earned value management actually forces you to apply a system a little bit more. So it's a little bit more difficult than just trying to grab ISO 9001 or 14001. The third key pillar is proactive execution. Time and time again, we see issues coming up on a project, and instead of addressing them early, which earned value helps you to do because it brings in that third tier from cost and schedule, it brings in performance. It allows you to be proactive. But yet, as you even work today, many of you may work still for companies that the whole fundamental basis of which they do is they focus on hours. But in a economy that we have right now, hours are insignificant. It's currency based. I may have estimated it's going to be 10,000 engineering hours utilizing Western engineers at $35 to $60 an hour. And then we shift our engineering to a low-cost engineering center in India or the Philippines. And the result is the hours go up and the rate goes down. And if you're not applying a good forecast method against that, your system's going to basically show you to start overrunning when you're actually in the savings. So you can't make that decision of proactive execution if you do not find the commonality of which you're operating on. And then as we discussed, the fourth item is clear transparency. The ability to identify and show where that documentation came from. Time and time again, going into schedules, going into cost, and going into the procurement systems, I tend to find that bid documents may not have been done. The schedules have a lack of critical path, too many constraints. And similarly, in the cost side, what we're seeing is that we're seeing the accounting cost dictating, and we're using, in some companies and countries, they use cash-based accounting, and they are not accruing their backed invoices. And in accruing in invoices, we tend to look at invoices received and approved but haven't been paid yet. And that has an impact on our cash flows. So what we try to look is that in the visibility perspective, we tend to see that there are 5 items that we look at. There's a corporate perspective, there's the procurement and supply chain, there's the EPCs, there's owner shareholders, and there's the PMO. And they all try to work together in one commonality. And utilizing the Secure DMZ philosophy, the ability to bring in schedule, budget, procurement, document control, performance, reporting, and collaboration is an integral part of the system. But what do we see? We see one group working on Oracle P6 or Microsoft Project or ASTA in one area. They may resource budget load, but a lot of times they're not. And then we run into things that some people try to track their actual costs in their schedule. Instead of looking at what the tools are, is that they are each a piece of the tool, and you integrate them into a master item, they treat them all separately. My document controls in another area. That causes me a complexity. I may not see telephone logs. I may not see RFIs. So you have a lack of information going out. Similarly, in the procurement system, we have an issue that a lot of times change orders are done and they're approved maybe on the cost side, but nobody's done a schedule impact or vice versa. And as I always said, I've had many times I've had a cost change that has not had a schedule impact, but every schedule change has a cost impact because of the changing of hours and dollars up and down. The fifth major area is in performance, and a lot of companies tended to form in the construction side. Many of the traditional big construction companies tend to focus that the performance is based on the hours on the construction guys doing the work or the subcontractors, but they're not looking at the value of the performance. So as such, they're not able to take partial credit. So the ability to put those 5 together allows you to collaborate and create a reporting system. Some of the biggest problems that we're going to talk about in a few minutes is what I call, the curse of what we do. It's considered the easiest application in project management, project controls, and every company uses it. But time and time again, it is going to be and will be your biggest problem. If you look at our left, what's most people still use? PDF reports, spreadsheet calculations. Excel is the biggest tool. Well, the biggest problem we have on Excel, every person who has an Excel spreadsheet, I can't get people working in it at the same time, or I'm checking in or checking out, or I'm sharing files. I email files, somebody moves a file, and I lose all the links. How many times have you all, even in the past few months, received an Excel spreadsheet sent to you, and basically it says missing links, enable, or somebody copied a cell and it's got a formula in, and you find a formula and it goes back 3, 4, 5, 6 different spreadsheets or files. So the issue we have is Excel is a great tool, and there are people who live by it. But as I like to say, you live by Excel, you will die by Excel. 3 of the biggest estimate discussions that I ever had were 3 projects that had seen that I either worked on or picked up the data after, where somebody overwrote a macro or overtyped a formula, even with security at the very end, and they lost $120 to $200 million on a $400 million project. That's not something you want to explain to management and shareholders. So what do we look at? Is that in this age of technology, and what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of people investing into softwares that all say they can collaborate and do one part. That's a good tool and a thing, but the software is just a tool. It doesn't, if you do not have people who can analyze the data, they're only going to report what's been put in the data. And as such, that becomes a complex issue. I've used many of the different softwares, as most of you probably have. The biggest issue I see, I may have multi-currency. Well, when is your currency being converted? Same day, once a month, a bucket? A bucket currency adjustment just last year in Kazakhstan, done by one of our contractors on a project we were on, the currency devaluated from Friday till Monday by 50%. Everybody was making 50% less. Businesses could not deliver. Businesses went out of business. Well, how do you pick that up on a monthly average? And how do you get that to your procurement group so that you can cycle and justify and make sure that your procurements aren't impacted? So the key thing about a relational tool is it does give you an interactive database in which to do that everybody's using one sheet. When you try to do and adjust that with Excel, you run into perpetual problems, and that can cause you a timely issue. Also, it tends to cause an issue with an interactive tool. You can get very nice dashboards. With an Excel spreadsheet, you're dependent on a graph, and if something types over that graph, God help you. So we look at the fact that in the PMO, what are we looking at in our control framework? When I basically review softwares, what I try to do is I look at my process and control system. So I look at what the project, organization, discipline, and controls are. Then I try to evaluate my resources. Critical, do I have the project management office? Has the project management office been split into a construction management office? Where's the funding come from? Is it internal? Is it capitalized? Is it from an IFI? Where's the information coming from? Is everybody using the same technology? And the most critical part, the foundation of that, people. If you get rid of the people and they don't have the experience, you're going to have data, but it doesn't mean anything if people cannot interpret it. So when I ask a question when I'm doing an audit or a review of a management to assess what level or where they're going to go, we have a series of project requirements. They want to be effective. They want timeliness. They need to meet specific requirements. It needs to be compliant, not just to their own internal, but it has to be compliant to the client and sometimes into regulatory government agencies. Does it allow you to have good relations? And do people feel reliable about it? And in the end, if they have that, you get a healthy return and healthy stakeholders. One of the most critical things that I always introduce was something that was taught to me by Stephen Bechtel when he still ran the company. He came into a meeting, we were doing a project review, and he gave a very great term. You know, he basically says he considered project controls the lifeblood of the project. We are the people that are the conscience. Our job is not to make people look good. Our job is not to make people bad. Our job is to present information so that the management and in the end, him as an executive could make a reliable decision. And then his son Riley further commented on, he just had one simple one. He doesn't shoot the messenger unless the messenger's late. So I think we can all relate to that terminology. So what do we look at in project management and controls? We try to focus on the fact that in project management and controls, we have procedures, and those procedures are orientated to the main disciplines as identified here. But one of the most important things I tend to find that's lacking is that a lot of times they have procedures, But everybody has procedures, but nobody's written an execution plan that combines the efforts of engineering, procurement, construction, quality, health and safety, IT, project controls. So without all that being coordinated, each engineering and project management discipline field will have their procedures and the steps that they're looking at. But you need something to coordinate that. So a lot of times, one of the first things I'll look at my audit is if I don't see a project execution plan, it's one of the first things I direct them to try to focus on. Then after that, it's training. One of the great stresses about earned value management is the perpetual training mentality. You have project managers who need to understand earned value at the summary level to execute. You have control account managers who have to understand at the detail level. And you have the project controls people who have to be trained in which the ability to implement and put that in. As such, that doesn't mean that you isolate and just train the project controls. The engineers that are CAMs, the procurement people are CAMs. They control budgets. They are the subject matter experts. That's why you bring them onto the project. And that's where the failure comes in, is a lack of training and interface. So during the contract administration phase, one of the things I always try to focus on is making sure that there's interaction. Similarly, I try to say don't ever specify a software. What happens when the software upgrades? You could be stuck using something for years that basically is not in compliance to what you're doing, but because it was written in a contract that way, it becomes very difficult to change. And then the last thing that we always look at, in some companies, they have their own internal auditors. Some companies, under the requirements of ISO on the international side, are always required to audit. What audits basically immediately construe to people a negativity. And I look at it as, I want you auditing my project as quick as possible and during the execution parts. And what people done in a lot of ways is they've done audits, but they don't call it an audit. They basically created the gate system so that at each stage of the gate, in combination with a management review or risk review, or maybe even the application of a CII, PDRI, Project Distribution Rating Index, it allows you to analyze the project and make an accurate decision in which to go forward. That is a form of an audit. But the biggest part about an audit isn't to go around and beat somebody with a stick and fire people. The objective of the audit is to find out where our weaknesses are so that we can bring people up. It's similar to when I tell people when they take certification courses from AACE, PMI, or the Guild, or focus on taking a certification course not to learn to pass. Focus on it to find your weakness. And that's the area that you should study on. Not everybody is perfect in everything, even with years and years of training. People have their own general layout of the way they go. I was an estimator and a scheduler before I got into cost, so I tend to think in that mentality. So as such, you have the differentiation. You can basically look pretty, or you can basically be out there and be on the ground pushing it. It doesn't do you any good to basically be pushing, though, if you do not have the support team. There was the old famous term, an army moves on its stomach. And some of the greatest battles that we've ever seen were because the smart army basically stayed near water. The armies that failed moved away from it. Well, that's very much applied to the way we apply business and in project management, project controls. If we basically go heavy tech and push forward, but we don't have the support, then you're going to fail. Now, one of the things that we try to do in the PMO, and we try to identify when we talk to people, and I do this a lot at my AACE presentations around the world, we have what we call a capability maturity model. And it's always good because it's remarkable the responses we get on that. Is that, we basically say there's 5 levels. There's the ad hoc where they focus on spreadsheets. They may have they'll have process and procedures, but they live and die by itself. To basically the optimized group. These are the companies that tend to basically have their Primavera or scheduling system with a code system that ties to the estimating, which ties to the cost, so the data can be shared and moved around. As such, they're able to basically do benchmarking and create portfolio analysis. But to do that, they have to have a system such as earned management. They have to have a definition of how they're going to operate, and they need to be managed. Many companies around the world that we talk to, some of the big ones, we've done a roadshow in Portugal, Spain, France, Russia, Canada, North America, Colombia, and all of them, in talking about this, all wind up hovering around the fact that they all want to be a 5, but most of them are hovering between a 3 and a 4, and some of them can't get off of manage because they do their estimating in Excel, they do their planning in Microsoft Project, and they do their analysis by printing out a Word report in PDF. Does it work? Yes. There's a graded threshold on it. But if you're trying to be that mature level which to do, and you are the client, what are you going to accept? Not accepting it doesn't have to be perfect, but the tools have to match. It doesn't mean that you can't have a combination of the tools, and it doesn't mean that you can't right size based upon the size and value of the project. You don't have to go buy the $4 million software to implement something. So one of the other aspects that we tend to focus into the program is that organizational change management. To get into these PMO modes, you are basically changing the perspective of which they operate. And one of the funniest things is people think of change management only being applied to the schedule, cost, or performance in the field. The change management strategy of the program needs to focus on different things. I use change control to adjust my procedures and processes or to remove items. It basically allows you to identify how your organization aligns. But one of the biggest problems I see is that we'll have a change control board, but we don't have anybody who's been trained to understand what a change is. Or you have that perpetual project dictator who says, I run a project on zero change. Well, nice theory, but the only two things in life that are sure are death, taxes, and change. We are in a perpetual world of change. The theories and concepts of which we use have been around for 100 years, going back to the assembly line, going into the Gatt and Frederick Taylor. And then it evolved in the 60s and 70s with earned value management, or CSC as it was called before. But the most important part is those programs were successful. Why are some organizations such as PMI so successful? They basically adapt to change, they review, and they get executive sponsorship. They market. They have the ability to create a system that allows people to change, but the most important part, it gets buy-in from the workforce. You don't just manage, control, and throw down on them and say, hey, I saw something that's great, and slap it on the workforce. A successful program integrates your experts into it, and it allows them to get done. An interesting concept that I ran into in 2010, I was at the Dutch Association, Cost Engineering has an event every couple of years, and I was there presenting. And the unemployment was very high in Europe at the time due to people being laid off because of the crisis. Well, the Dutch perspective was very interesting. If people wanted to collect their unemployment check, they had to do two things. Not just go say they looked at a job and collect the money. They had to go do training. And that didn't mean that they had to go find training in a different field. It meant that they got paid by the government to train within their field to become more marketable to their people. And that's a very unique perspective. But yet, what do we see every time when we see a budget? The first thing we hack internally, we target training. So one of the objectives of trying to do this in organizational change theory is making sure that training is applied. As well, looking at the project charter and coming up with the project charter that people can buy in and feel comfortable with. The greatest thing that I always feel, having written for AACE, Fiatech PMI, and the Guild, please plagiarize me. Just do it in a way that gives me credit. The biggest flattery we have is I would love people to everybody have and use terminology that's very similar. The AACE skills and knowledge the body of knowledge of PMI. They are a combined tool. You cannot have project management without project controls. So they interact with each other. Work together with them and you will have a successful project. Don't just pick sides and say one is better than the other. Now moving forward, some of the recommendations what we just look at. These are the successes and failures that we have seen in our group, and it's a shared group. As I said, one of the greatest things I find about belonging to associations and coming to conferences isn't for the time away from work and isn't to see the latest tool. And really, it isn't to hear people speak like that. It's to interact with somebody, to sit with somebody on another perspective and another project and see how they're doing it. And that's where these recommendations come from. So what we try to focus on, if you want to be successful in a PMO project management environment, you need to implement governance and control. This governance control, what I try to say is has to be proactive, it needs to be efficient, and it needs to align to the needs of the project. Just because it worked on project A doesn't mean it's going to work on project B. We've all had that great thing that we go project to project to project, and sometimes it feels great to have a person taking you along with you, but is that flexible? That's a perspective you need to look on that when you're putting into that tool. The second thing we look at is that project management and project controls is basically the art of the impossible becoming reality. And anybody who doesn't believe that, you can look at the pyramids. That is the ultimate symbol of excellence. It was planned, it was executed, regardless of the theories and other part, it was done. And it was an ability to do. When you look back, they had engineering, they had architecture, they had plans, they had procurement. We can take those base simple theories and apply it forward. But I always say that our job is to take something that's on a piece of paper and build it. The greatest pride I have as a father is going around and taking my children and saying, here's the hotel I built. Here's the runway that we landed on an airport. The phone you're using comes from the telecom systems we done. And then my tree-hugging side of the family says, yeah, and you built that ugly oil refinery. But hey, you're driving your car. You're not driving a battery-powered car. So try to look at that focus. Another perspective is what basically we are in a theory-based of analytics. Don't overanalyze, though. Do not have people spending 19 days of the month pounding data into the software. They're not analyzing. They're just doing redundant data entry. If you want visibility, you want people speaking on it. One of the most important things if you're on a U.S. government project on earned value, when the DCAA, DCMA audits come and take place, or the surveillances, I had the dubious distinction of going through 1 IBR and 7 surveillances in a 9-month period because somebody in DCMA said we had to do it. But the most important part is that we did pass and done, but basically the first question that they asked every time, they didn't come and talk to me. They didn't come and talk to the project manager. They talked to the CAMs, the project controls people, and the people that are responsible. Too many issues in the analytical use of data. What we do in that visibility is we give people the responsibility of something, but we don't give them the authority to make the change. And that basically will cloud your visibility. So try to make sure that you give them that authority. And how do you do that? You give them that expertise and training. Hire trusted experts and basically try and roll out and plan that project in a way that gets done. We are not in an age anymore where I get the top 10 people on a project coming off the company. I may see it on a bid review, but in the end, I generally get 1 or 2 experts and I get some training. And that's actually what I look for. I don't go out and hire all the best people to work on the project. I hire some young people that we can train them. They're the future of the PMOs, they're the future of the companies, and the future of the projects. And that's probably the biggest thing I can stress is, as I said, by being a person who implements projects, I am a diehard believer in perpetual training. And I've been fortunate enough is that many of the managers, the reason why they work with me or still call or ask is they see the same thing. Their projects were successful because their people were trained and their ability to respond. And they didn't just walk up and say, hey, I got a problem, boss. They basically said, here's the problem. This is how it happened. This is how we prevent it from happening. And this is what we do to go forward. One of the big parts I like to stress in my training, in 30, 40 years, I took it and continue to take it very seriously. I never had a project when I was on it that I went to the project manager and we were over budget or behind schedule, it didn't mean the schedule didn't change, and it didn't mean the budget didn't change. It meant that by applying these tools and pushing back sometimes to make sure these tools are in place, we were able to give them the ability to make the correct decision. That's what that means. So in the end, the key points that we should remember: upfront plan and support is fundamental to your systems and tools. Try to remember that our job is to make the impossible possible. It's to take the dreams and theories of a design and put it and apply it into the field. Whether you're building a computer system or manufacturing line or doing an oil refinery, it's irrelevant. You're in taking the concept and idea and putting it out. The third thing to remember, which I stressed heavily, take stock of where you are and where your organization is. One of the things I stressed, and I heavily stress when I do EVM training, your job isn't just to sit there and say yes, yes, yes. Your job is to actually tell me no sometimes. In the end, as the manager, I may make a decision, and that may go against contrary to what the data is, but I'm sometimes have to make a political decision. We all get put in that environment. But the most important part is you took stock and you took in consideration what your experts told you. Make sure that if your organization wants to do this and has it, create an effective change plan. Don't just walk in and say, hey, I just saw this great software sitting at a conference and let's go buy it and put it in. Well, that may be nice, but is it grandfather? Is it cost effective? Is it multi-language? Is it multi-currency? You need to have a plan on that in place and direct and implement that plan. The benefit of a PMO team is that you bring in experienced people, subject matter experts. Look at the PMOs when you're interviewing them. What are you interviewing? You want to bring in an experienced team that is training people and believes in educating your own people if the objective is you're going to have your own internal group. Now, a lot of people say, well, no, they're just doing capital construction. But the interesting theory is what happened, when I did I did a refinery project in Texas, the director was very focused on the fact, that's nice that the project gets built, but afterwards I got to run the maintenance people to take care of it afterwards. And they need to know how to do mini estimates, mini schedules, and to plan and focus on the work. So I need your execution people to partner up with my operations and my commissioning people so that we're more effective at the end. And getting buy-in from your workforce. Personally, I have walked away from projects and companies because they basically bought a software or set up a system in place, tried to cram it down on it, and took no feedback from us. I think the biggest change that we all remember in Primavera during the changes of P3 to Oracle Primavera or to the others is that required a significant involvement of IT, and all of a sudden IT and IT project managers took it over, and that became ineffective. You have people in remote locations. Well, maybe they can't access Citrix, so having all your software sitting in a headquarter building 2 countries away may not be effective. You need to grade and look at that. And then the most important part is targeted training. And how do you do targeted training? One of the things I do is I like to give, beyond looking at somebody's CV and experience, it's the interesting part. I've had some people that are very, very experienced for 30 years, some of the best in estimating, planning, or scheduling what they do. But you're going to put them on training and they have to start doing the reports and stuff. And you just throw it on them. You need to make sure that you target the training respective to where the people are. And then also don't give a project manager detailed planning one-on-one courses. He doesn't need it. Try to focus on what they should be looking for. The critical path, the float, redundant logic, and look at that area. And similar on the cost side so that they can understand where the changes in performances are coming from. So in summary, I hope you found this interesting. Many of you say, well, you just preach to the choir. That's the whole point in some of these. But the most important part, master your requirements thoroughly. Make sure that a platform has fully complete requirements, and make sure that your expertise and methodology are in a way that basically benefits your problem. I'm sorry, benefits your sex, not problem. So from April 10th to 12th, we hope to see a lot of you at the Fiatech conference. If you have any questions of the OnTrack AACE people, we'll be at booth 305, and we greatly appreciate the opportunity to share with this, and hopefully between all this, you found this worthwhile. So now I got to try to be technology thing and try to shift. So if you have any questions for me, I now see a question bar popped up. So are there any questions?
Excellent, Sean. Thank you so much. So we're really thrilled that you all are coming to the technology conference. And as we wait for people to enter questions into the box, could you go over maybe one of the main things that people are saying, you know, we've experienced all these mega challenges, which you really went through quite in detail on just how the experiences that people are going through. I think that the best image was the railroad track that was all wavy. You know, you couldn't get to where you were going because of all of the barriers. What is the main thing, like one particular question that you get all the time and it still makes you scratch your head?
The most interesting one is one I've been going through right now, and Matt may jump in also on it. We have a client who is switching countries or switching regions, and one of their perpetual comments is, well, why can't we just, done it this way in every other place, why do we have to change when we go to this other area? And you tell them why, and there's a refusal to basically adapt to it. And that's that becomes probably the most frustrating part. You know, that was when I was talking about the wage rates, you know, trying to move into another country just because you pay $5 an hour and you're going into the European Union, you're not going to get away with $5 an hour. And that's one of the biggest ones that we're running in across the board. And that's the one everybody seems to be complaining about when we did our tour. When we did our little road show, pretty much trying to do just like this, Matt and I put AACE sections together in Portugal, Italy, Paris, and Rome, and Russia. That was the most common question. How do I go somewhere else?
Yep. Yeah. And I think it's Matt here. To me, that really speaks to really one of the root things we see in every organization and government really is the siloization and the protectionism of some of those areas, such as the estimation, the scheduling, planning, and how the information held within there and some of their good processes and whatnot get held back from the rest of the organization. So part of what we do in the best practice of the PMO is to say we really want to break down some of these silos, create that transparency between them, and that really ends up promoting that proactive ability, proactive execution, so that if I know ahead of time what I wouldn't have heard 2 weeks ago, I should have heard it 2 weeks ago, but I didn't hear it today. If I can act upon that 2 weeks earlier, I get a much better ability to control cost and to rein in those schedule creeps and whatnot as well. So that's really what we really focus on a lot, is breaking down the silos, bringing people together, and we do that through a number of ways. We have some really advanced integration layer, better than a lot of these things, and we can integrate to the Tableaus or the Power BIs or the Oracles or the SAPs much better, and bring people forward up that maturity level so that people can actually do analytics. And what we can really put in front of them for analytics is actually quite amazing. Once you start to bring together your different data sources from your different silos, you can actually get some amazing efficiencies.
Like one of the other things that stresses is everybody, you know, they see that somebody does the software and they focus and stress on the software. As you heard on this, I didn't really talk about software at all. Software to us, what we're saying a PMO, software is not relevant. It's the methodology and performance of which we do. Technology is critical, but if people can't use their smartphone, why do you give them a smartphone technology? If people don't have good Wi-Fi or good access, why do you want to set them up in an environment of which they're going to fail? That's a complaint that most of them have. My biggest complaint was perpetually somebody in corporate goes on a boondoggle and decides he's going to drop $3 million buying software and shove it down my throat, and it's not compliant to what our system is. And people get frustrated. They spend years trying to make, the technology's not bad. That's the method of implementation. But who's getting the blame right now? That crummy Kildrummy, that crummy Ecosys, that crummy OnTrack, the software gets the blame for the ignorance of the part. And that's a hard one for, we fight that all the time.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, the integration of all the different systems. I can remember we were talking with about the SETI Awards about this, and went in some great detail with the panel members there about capability maturity. We broke it down to, I think, 60 or 70 different points across operations and capital projects. And one of the big conclusions we came to was, whether it's a Bechtel or a Worley, and they've got some really excellent controls and engineering, or some great process in scheduling and planning or whatnot, the commonality is on these mega projects, you get down to the lowest common denominator. And virtually everyone agreed, and this is Exxon, Dow, et cetera, that even within their own organizations, there's a few standouts, but not many of them at all are even halfway up the maturity level in any one of their different areas and disciplines. And when you get into that mega project and you have 3-4 different parties mixing varied systems, you need to have that commonality approach. You need to have that Rosetta Stone to really manage who is saying what, even keep a common nomenclature, et cetera, and everyone gets down to that lowest common denominator of level of maturity at that case. So that's one of the other things we try to address by providing a common platform, so that everyone can still leverage their expertise from the different EPCs. The owner can still have good transparency, but everyone is now in the same standard and talking the same language. So it's kind of like the Tower of Babel, right? If everyone wants to bring up any biblical reference.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's a great segue into just kind of connecting the dots and preparing all of us for the upcoming technology conference. Collectively, as Sean said, we look to discuss those challenges, but like Matt said, let's get to that consistent, common conversation place, and you will experience a lot of that at the technology conference. So I hope that you join us there. You will definitely get to meet the OnTrack team and get to know quite a few of the other organizations and your peers. So join us there, and don't miss out on this opportunity. We stay tuned to the Fiatech.org website for future webinars, and we hope that you have a wonderful day. We look forward to seeing you at the conference, and thank you both, Sean and Matt, for joining us today.